It's my first time in Savannah with this film that these Oscar-nominated directors have made, Tia Lessin and Carl Deal, and our producer, Karen Ranucci, is also here. It's about the 30 years of Democracy Now! This is the 30th anniversary of this daily, grassroots, global, independent, international investigative news hour. And I'm so excited that the model of this people-powered, listener-supported, corporate-free media will get out around the world, because I really do think independent media is what will save us.
Well, that is really great for a 30th anniversary. That's amazing, and I cannot wait to see it.
Thank you. I can't wait for you to see it, Jazmine.
In the beginning of the film, when we had you with Maurice, you know, and getting him out of prison, where does that fit into journalism school? You know, where do they say, like, here's what you don't do. Don't get somebody out of prison because you'll never get a job at MSNBC.
Well, I can't really comment because I didn't go to journalism school, but you know, when I think about Maurice and all that he went through, imprisoned in Angola, I also think about Troy Anthony Davis. I was last in Savannah, actually in Jackson, Georgia. We did a live broadcast for so many hours covering what we didn't know at the beginning would be the execution of Troy Davis, but it did end up being, and came here as well for the funeral. But there are so many issues that have to be covered, as we know right now. Everything that we're dealing with. Sitting next to these women, Karen Ranucci, the producer of this film, who long had this dream of this film. At the very beginning in the firehouse, there was a producer, a videographer crawling on the ground, videoing us after 9/11. That was Karen so many years ago. And Tia, and choosing Tia Lessin and Carl Deal, these incredible directors who've been nominated for an Oscar with their film about Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath, Trouble the Water, have won Emmy after Emmy. To work with them for these last few years, you know, is very difficult to be followed. But if you have to be, Carl and Tia are your stalkers. They're the people who have just their incredible both compassion, sense of justice, and doggedness, as Zazu Goodpup would say. It's just an incredible combination as we try to get word out all over the world about the importance of independent media in a time of war and elections, in a time of increasing repression and targeting directly of the media, how important it is, because media is essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
100%. Yeah. I do want to take that and ask Tia. So, Tia, as I was watching this, I kept thinking how amazing Amy is on a daily basis, right? But also how she has had amazing artists following her around for 30 years. And you know, there were some shots in this film that were 2 seconds long, but caught my attention. Like right before we invaded Iraq, you were on the phone there, and there was a shot where you had 3 cell phones on your head like this, and you were swaying around. It was a 2-second shot, but I just thought, so, was that you who got that shot, Tia, or Karen, or?
We had this wealth of extraordinary footage, 30 years worth of archival treasure. In that particular instance, it was Julia Dangle and Jonathan Oppenheim, the beloved editor we lost a few years ago, were following Amy around in the lead up to the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. And so Julia was generous enough to let us draw on that footage. We had NHK, who followed Amy to the young man's house in Brooklyn who was preparing for his bar mitzvah. We had, just Max Stahl, who was a cameraman for Yorkshire TV, was in Indonesia with Alan Naran and in East Timor, and shot that extraordinarily difficult, tragic footage of the massacre, where you see Amy and Alan in the footage in advance. But we also had this extraordinary, broadcast news archives, C-SPAN, we had CNN, we saw Amy. Amy told us this story about being in the White House and having the Mike McCurry, Clinton's press guy, say, the turnip is dry. And, she said it, and I thought, oh, that's a good story. That's a great little button on a story. But then we actually found the footage, and that's exactly what he said. So,
and then you had the reaction of Amy deflated, going like this close up. Somebody thought to get the close up. Yeah.
No, and they don't usually
Who got that shot?
That was some camera person
Incredible.
who was there. But I will say, for me, just stepping back, in this moment where so much of history is being challenged, where the regime right now is trying to erase our history, whether it's in museums and public schools, it was very meaningful to me personally to get steeped in the archive this last 30 years, which is sort of my adult life, and watch it much more than this. We had so much more to choose from, but this is the power of the daily journalism that Amy does. It's essentially, the record keeping, the history keeping, the factual history of our days, and so we had this privilege of putting it all together into a feature, and being with this extraordinary woman who doesn't have 3-4 years to make film. She has 24-48 hours to digest the news and to get some of the best guests on the show within, hours of something major and cataclysmic happening. So anyhow, I have a lot to say, but I think you're much more interested in this.
Let me give Karen a moment to answer a question, and then I'm going to let our friend Jim over here give a whole slew of questions, I'm sure. So, but Karen, how do you produce something as massive as this? How do you get your arms around this? How do you decide what to tackle? As a producer, oftentimes you have to say no, right, to a director or your star, or you have to say, look, we have a timeline, guys. Like, we got to get it into this festival.
Well, this was something that when I started working at Democracy Now! In the days after September 11th, when we came together, a group of independent media volunteers, to turn the radio program into a television program. From that experience, I was just watching and understanding that I was seeing history being made, and I was taking notes. This was an important time. This is important if we ever make a documentary about this. So it was a lot of just observing, and then the time was right, and I brought it to Tia and Carl and said, we've got quite a story here with a lot of footage. So it was a tremendous journey. But I wanted to address your question of how do you, as if, I think the question was more about, like, are you an activist or a journalist?
Or a journalist, yeah.
And, I think there's a tremendous lie that gets taught in journalism school about objectivity, because journalists are human beings, and if we see people being hurt, if we see injustice, we're not supposed to just accept that. It's our job to shine a light on injustice, and that doesn't make us a journalist when we, just keep pursuing the truth. So
Jim, you want to comment on that?
Right, yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because Juan says something really interesting. He says, I was an advocacy journalist before that was even a term, which I can relate to because that's been sort of like my wheelhouse, I guess. Yeah. And but you always come up against the criticism of, well, you're supposed to be objective. You're supposed to just call balls and strikes. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, Amy, how do you explain to someone who says that you're supposed to be objective, which in most cases really just means you've challenged their prior assumptions, really is what that means. How do you explain to someone mired in that point of view of the importance of advocacy journalism as a practice?
I mean, as journalists, we have to be fair and we have to be accurate. I once wrote a column on an issue, and the next day we were having two people on debating it, and the person whose position I didn't agree with read the column and said, I'm not going to do this. This isn't fair because the host is against what I have to say. And I said, well, are you going to pull out? Do we have to say you've pulled out? And she said, well, I don't want you to say that. I said, but that's what you would be doing. So she did come on. And after, she said it was the fairest debate she had ever participated in. Because my idea of a fair debate is people present their best argument, not you present your best argument and you present your worst argument. You both present your best argument and let people decide, regardless of what I think about it. But I know what every mainstream journalist thinks on every issue. All too often, if you're just advocating for the establishment, it's considered not having a point of view. And when you bring up a different issue, they're saying, well, you're advocating for another point of view. An example, when we're going into the Iraq War, the mass number of people were opposed to that war, right? The people who flew into the World Trade Center towers were not Iraqi, not one of them. The debate in the networks, and all too often weapons manufacturers actually are owned by corporations that own the networks, but the debate in the networks was, should we bomb from the air or move boots in on the ground? That's the debate. What about, should we be doing this at all? And that's what millions of people were rocking the globe, shouting from the rooftops and the streets. At best, they get a photograph in the New York Times, but the views of those that were advocating for war get fully explained. And then you've got the soldiers. As soldiers are going off to war, they are chronicled, leaving their families, how do they feel, going off to war, by the way, as they should be. But when they come back, and so many are deeply injured by or come to realizations about what are we doing there, suddenly they're not being interviewed anymore. And of course, I simply say they should be interviewed going and they should be interviewed coming. And protesters, activists, or look at the Native Americans and at the standoff at Standing Rock, they didn't call themselves protesters, they called themselves water protectors. Those voices that often represent, well, as I always say, those who care about war and peace, those who care about the climate catastrophe, the fate of the planet, those who care about racial and economic justice, those who care about LGBTQ issues, are not a fringe minority. They're not even a silent majority. They're the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back. And finally, we've been talking about the corporate media for decades and the problems with these corporations that own media outlets and many other companies. And it's actually the newsrooms that don't make them money. And when they merge and have to get approval from the administration, in this case, the Trump administration, they will give up a lot to get that approval, to make their billions of dollars. Now, we always talked about the corporate media, and people within the corporate media would say, come on, we're not towing their line. Why do you call us corporate journalists? And they can operate within very limited parameters. And they're now the first ones, like the third of the Washington Post newsroom that was laid off a few weeks ago. I mean, do you know we interviewed Nilu Tabrizi? She was a Washington Post reporter. She just did an investigation into the girls' primary school in the first morning of the first day of the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran was blown up. The girls' primary school, at least 100 girls dead. And she was investigating, but no longer for the Washington Post because she had just been laid off. They'd laid off, oh, who's they? Jeff Bezos, the billionaire owner of the Washington Post, who also owns Amazon, who just gave the Trump family $40 million for this Melania documentary. Do you think
most expensive documentary of all time?
Right, and of course, it didn't cost that to make, but it was just a pretext to give the Trump family money. And it wasn't enough. He had to wipe out this newsroom. Almost everyone in the Middle East division of the Washington Post was fired. So Nilu is on Democracy Now!, no longer reporting for the Washington Post. And the reporter, the woman who was reporting from the front lines in Ukraine, she got, I don't know, was it a 1-sentence, 2-sentence email that said, you're out, as she is there reporting. We need independent media. Media is essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
I want to come to you. Amy, in the wake of the collapse of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, how many people have you had to lay off at Democracy Now?
We don't take government money. We don't take corporate money. We survive on the support of listeners, viewers, readers, and foundations. That's how Democracy Now! Gets by, but the vast majority is from the listeners, the viewers, and the readers around the world, because we started at the very beginning of the internet 30 years ago. Because we couldn't afford satellites to send our radio program. This is before the word podcast, but it was a podcast. We put it on the intertubes, right? We put it on our website, and then stations could take it for free. And then, because it was there, and it was an early morning show, people could transcribe the show, and they would send it to us, and our transcribe coordinator would get the first segment from Germany, the second from Mexico, the third from Utah, and we'd post it online. And then journalists would take our interviews and bring them to the State Department press conferences, the White House, the Pentagon, and ask questions based on our sources who were closest to the story. For me, the word exclusive means Democracy Now! Ran it last year, or it's just a failure, because we don't want to be exclusive. And that's the reason for the title. Steal this story, please.
Very bold motto and a bold title.
No one has been laid off.
Okay, to clear this, yes.
Well, and also, just to say, the show goes out to 1,500 stations for free. There is no license fee charged for this, and that's a model. You know, Amy has invented, or at least helped to pioneer, this model of independent media that a lot of these laid-off journalists are turning to. They're turning to Substack. They're turning to podcasts. Maybe they'll be turning to Democracy Now! Maybe you'll have some new employees.
Well, I hope that some aspiring journalists are here taking notes on this business plan, because you call it a model, an organization, but it's a business plan, right? That you guys run a business, let's be clear. And Jim here is a business owner, and I'm curious what you think about this business model that we're in, where you have to resist the corporate dollars but find a way.
Yeah, that's a great segue, because I wanted to say, vis-a-vis what you just said, about aspiring journalists, I think the most inspiring thing about this film for me is how it not only focuses on Amy's career, long and illustrious career, but also the way you have molded and nurtured and nourished a whole new generation of great young journalists who are doing great work in their own right. And that to me is the most valuable part of your mission. I don't know if you
Nermeen
would
Sheikh,
agree.
She's the new.
Exactly.
Nermeen and Jeremy, Sharif came out of Democracy Now!, Anjali Kamat, Nicole Salazar. They go off and do their work. They come back to Democracy Now!, and it's a huge global community. It is so important. And every week at Democracy Now!, we have classes coming. We just showed this film at the College Media Association in New York, and I think this is part of the power of the impact campaign of Steal the Story, Please, as we move forward, is that when it shows at places like that, these are young journalists at colleges, community colleges, four-year colleges across the country with their advisors. And then the next day, they came to Democracy Now! On Friday morning. We had to finally kick them out, say, you're here for a conference in Midtown Manhattan. You've come from Indiana and Illinois and Michigan. You got to go back or they're not going to like us very much. But they just wanted to stay and talk about all these issues and talk about people like, what was our latest trickle-up journalism? Last week, after the State of the Union, we had Alia Ramanan, and she's the autistic, disabled, remarkable woman who's driving to the doctor in Minneapolis after Renee Good was killed. And they stop her car, the immigration agents. We used to talk about CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Now it's all CBP, right? Customs and Border Patrol. They stop her car. They smash her window. They tell her to get out of the car. She's seatbelted in. She's telling them, I'm disabled. They say, too late, too late. This is all on tape. And this is why they also go after those who are using their cell phones, just citizen journalists, citizens of the world. People like Alex Preti, who's holding his phone. And so we see this videotape of Alia, and she is in her car. She's saying, I'm disabled. They rip open the car door, and they bring a knife across, and she's thinking, oh, my God, I'm going to die. And they cut the seatbelt, drag her out. They detain her at the Whipple Federal Building. She's asking for medical attention. She's not able to talk to people. She finally gets out. We interview her after that. You can just make up your own mind about what has happened to her, like so many others. And then Ilhan Omar invites her, the Somali refugee congresswoman, first refugee congressperson, to the State of the Union address. So the Congress members and senators, they all sit here, and then the guests, they sit in the gallery. And so she's in the gallery. She's behind a mayor and a police chief of two different, areas of the country. She is watching, especially the Republicans, standing up, cheering, sitting down, standing up, applauding. Fine, that's what the State of the Union is about. And then she hears President Trump slamming people of Minnesota, of Minneapolis, where she is from, and she stands up in quiet protest. And they drag her out again. She can't get her cane. It is so serious that a supervisor tells them they've got to stop the authorities, that then arrested her again. Why? Because she stood up, but she didn't applaud? She's taken to jail. We had invited her because she was going to the State of the Union to be on and talk about her experience next morning. She came on, the first thing she said is, I'm wearing the same thing I wore at the State of the Union because I didn't get a chance to go home. I went to see what the president said and to see how everyone responded, and I was arrested again. I got out at 4 a.m. and I just came right over. And after that ran, the New York Times quoted her story on Democracy Now! And talked about her being arrested. The Washington Post, what's left of it, did that as well. And again, this is what we call trickle-up journalism. Not the know-nothing pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong, but going to the people who are at the heart of the story, telling, yes, their version of it. And that helps inform how you want to proceed, who you want to vote for, how active you want to be. We don't tell you who to vote for, but we sure do say vote. If we don't participate in this country, we're going to lose it.
So this goes to another theme. This goes to another theme of the movie that I feel is really strongly portrayed, is courage, the concept of courage. So you've got moral courage, which is obvious in the film. You've got professional courage, which is also obvious. But you also have physical courage. And I wanted to talk to you about that specific aspect because it occurred to me with the Nigeria story, you not only could have been killed, you could have been disappeared, like gone, and no one would know. And where do you get the reservoir of physical courage?
And the courage to get up every morning with so much energy, Amy. Like, what do you? You're a vegan. I mean, physically.
I think it's
how
the
do you-
hookah sneakers.
The hookah. That's the secret right there,
if
Jim.
we
Yeah,
would
yeah, yeah.
accept corporate funding, I think the sneaker companies would be our first preference, but we don't. It doesn't compare to the courage of the people we cover. When you look at the people of East Timor who for 25 years experienced one of the great genocides of the 20th century, I was astounded. What caused them to, when you saw that day of the massacre, November 12th, 1991, once again they gather in the streets. I mean, freedom of assembly, there's none. Freedom of protest, there's none. Freedom of speech, there's none. But they still, because yet again young people were killed, they marched to the cemetery. That is astounding. What we do doesn't compare. We're Western journalists who are largely protected or certainly don't have anything near the threats that they have. And I think that inspires us and the whole team of people. Democracy Now! Is a brain trust. It is an amazing group of people who are deeply committed to independent media and hope that this model will be replicated all over.
Yeah, well, there was a line in the film where you mentioned that there's not a day that goes by you don't remember East Timor. And I think every courageous journalist has some story that haunts them, right, Jim?
Yeah, I have nothing to compare to that. Though.
You
That's
probably
just
have something.
Well, it's funny you mention that because I guess and this has nothing to do with being in physical danger. I guess it may a little bit, but I guess the most formative thing for me as a journalist was, especially in alternative media, was the Iraq War, because I think people don't really remember how repressive the environment was for journalists, well, for everyone, but for journalists in particular then. I remember I was one of a very few people locally who spoke out against the war in any kind of a journalistic fashion. And I felt my job was in jeopardy. I felt...
You lose friends over it?
I don't know about friends, but I, almost felt physically unsafe in ways that I haven't since, which I found really interesting. So we had the segment about the Iraq War in the film, and that brought back a lot of very vivid, visceral memories for me. And then it also viscerally, we're in the middle of another regime change war in the Middle East, which is using virtually identical messaging to sell it almost word for word. And so I guess my question for you is, we can see what's the same about that, but what's changed now? What's different now versus 2003?
Well, I think you're making such an important point, and I also want to put this question out to you both. The resonances, it's so critical to really get into the details, because I think young people, it's hard to believe, but many young people that come to Democracy Now! And listen to Democracy Now!, it's a real bridge between generations, weren't even born. at the time of the Iraq War. It is astounding. In the lead up to the Iraq War, the amount of mass protests, and when you see what at that time was called shock and awe, we were talking to reporters on the ground in Baghdad, but also telling them, put down the phone if you're about to be hit. We don't want you to sacrifice your life. I was afraid to talk to Sharif in Gaza. He would wear his press vest, and I was so afraid constantly. I wanted to cut off the conversation because I didn't want him to be exposed in any way. But the resonances of so much right through now. Remember, we were arrested by the Minneapolis-St. Paul police. Now they are pushed aside by this brutal, federal, untrained, highly weaponized force that especially the right in this country always warned against, right? The Black Hawk helicopters, the invasion of your privacy. And what's amazing now is that I think these actions are uniting people across the political spectrum.
Yeah, I would add, Jim, you remember when Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary at the time of the Iraq War, got up and what did he say?
Everyone needs to be careful what they say.
Everybody needs to be careful of what they say. Now, how different is that? I guess it's a little different now because Trump is actually arresting journalists. You know, we saw he's deporting journalists. He deported a Salvadoran journalist working in the United States, and they're killing journalists in Gaza. They've killed more journalists in Gaza, a couple hundred now?
Hundreds of journalists, nearly 300. I mean, according to media organizations, they've never seen anything like it. CPJ just did a report of the mass killing of journalists, around the world, and 2/3 in the last year, I don't know if I have the numbers exactly right, are in Gaza.
The numbers are so important because put a comparison on that in America. What's the population in Gaza versus journalists? 2 million. You know, somebody who's smart and can do the numbers, but how many 300 journalists? How much would that equal in America? That would be 30,000 journalists killed here.
And I would just say that is it's a signifier of how important journalists are and how threatening they are to these authoritarian regimes. They wouldn't want to arrest them and they wouldn't want to kill them if they weren't a threat. And I think that there's, some power to be derived from that. And we're hoping that this film inspires young people and old, to speak out, to be able to say something when otherwise it's silent.
I wanted to just ask something because you've spent years now making this film, and what amazes me is, in an odd way, it's just the beginning, because now it takes on a life of its own, and this impact campaign to get it out there. The corporations that used to stream it or broadcast it, they are, if you look at the Oscar-nominated documentaries, very few of them are going to be picked up. It is amazing.
Well, the film that won the Oscar last year doesn't have U.S.
No Other Land.
No Other Land does not have U.S. distribution. One of the Oscar nominees this year, Cutting Through Rocks, has no U.S. distribution. There's no way for you to see it outside of a film festival in this country. And that's a general problem with political films. But these problems are getting more difficult because of the consolidation that we and Amy has been talking about for years.
But you are getting this out with support.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, because it's up to us to distribute this film, and that's exactly what we're doing. And so we're starting our theatrical run, and we'll be coming to cities all around the country. But then we will be doing our community distribution. And I want to say I have postcards outside that tell you how to get in touch with us through our website, stealthisstory.org. And you can request a screening in your school, in your churches, in your synagogues. You know, bring this film to everyone you know and try to encourage them to stand up. One of the things that impresses me, I've been doing a lot of filming people after the screenings, and they say to me, well, if Amy could do it, I can do it. And I need to stand up, and so do we all. So help us get this film out.
And the film is coming to Atlanta. We have at least a week, maybe 2-week-long engagement in Atlanta and 50 other cities right now. Do you know the Atlanta dates?
No, not offhand, but it's on our website, stealthisstory.org. So.
Well, thank you so much for making Savannah a stop on your tour.
Also, we just want to say it's amazing to be here in the inaugural year of the Hindsight Film Festival, and congratulations to you for doing this.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to Patrick for this idea because, I started 30 years ago doing archival research in documentary film for a man by the name of Charles Guggenheim, Davis Guggenheim, The Inconvenient Truth Oscar winner, his father. And so I love archival research, and I love the practice of it. I love the watching of it. And the fact that you are recognizing it as not just a craft, but an art form, and the importance of that in this moment, I think, is really profound. So thank you for devoting this festival to that, and for the Better Angel Society for recognizing the power of film and archive.
And what you and Carl did in finding all this archival footage, like just describing that scene with Mike McCurry, Clinton's press person. I mean, to find the camera footage that is looking at Mike McCurry, and then, I don't even remember at the time seeing cameras looking at us and the press, but that's one small example, because this is such a significant archival film, and the research you did for it is really shocked us all.
Exactly. And the criteria for Hindsight Film Festival is historical documentaries, right? And people keep asking me, well, what does that mean? What are the rules, you know? And so we follow pretty closely what the Ken Burns Prize for Film rules are, which is that half the film has to be about events and people and topics that took place 22 years in the past. So we've not put a specific time frame on it, but maybe we're a little more lenient, maybe 10 years in the past overall. But so what that means is that you can still have 49% of your film relating to present day.
And that's what I think Democracy Now! In this film is all about, especially for young people, to see mass movements and how they've organized over the years. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it's movements that make history. You know, the person in the White House is the most powerful person on earth. But there is a force more powerful, and it is people organized, I mean, in this room and beyond that, all over the country and around the world. That is the force that's most powerful. And who is chronicling that? The movements of the past, and that's what you're honoring, and how it then informs what we do for where we're going. Don't forget about what Maria Ressa said, the Nobel Prize-winning journalist who took on Duterte in the Philippines as he cracked down on the media, arrested her, sued her. He's now in jail at The Hague, about to be put on trial for being responsible for killing thousands of people in the Philippines. And what she says in this film, that she said on Democracy Now!, be very careful, because the rights you lose today, you may never get back. So that is the challenge, how you stop those rights from being taken.
Patrick, I just want to say I can't help but see Barbara Kopple here in the front row.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah. You know, you were talking about Oscar winners that were lost.
Two Oscar
You
winners.
couldn't find Harlan County for many years, but now it is back in 4K restoration, and we're showing it tomorrow. So,
And
yeah.
it is one of the it is probably the film that inspired me to go into documentary filmmaking. I was actually, I was a labor organizer when I saw this film. It is such a treat to have, and an honor to have you here at this screening, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the film again on the big screen tomorrow.
All right, I think that's a wrap, guys, huh? Okay, let's go.
Thank you.
Thank you.